Hello everyone and welcome. So thank you very much for joining us today for the second webinar on interactive cargo. So this is the episode 3 of the Ayada digital cargo webinars. My name is Sonia Ben Hamida and I'm the project manager interactive cargo at Ayada. This webinar is recorded for future use. So the video recording will be made available shortly after the end of this webinar, as well as the presentation. We have competition law guidelines, so please do not discuss any element of prices, including fares or service charges, commissions, allocations of customers or markets, marketing plans, commercial terms, or any other strategic decision, group boycotts, your relations with agents, airlines, solution providers, or other third parties, any other issue aimed at influencing the independent business decisions of competitors. So let's start this session. This is the third one. So today's agenda we'll start with the Ayada Interactive Cargo project achievements and next steps. So I will present the progress of the project, and Carlos Tornero, Deputy General Counsel at Ayada, will talk about data use agreement. So we'll present during 30 minutes, then we'll move on to the second part on safely and efficiently approving the use of cargo tracking devices, presented by Jeff Clark, founder and CEO of 7P Solutions. The third part is about sharing IoT device data with one record. So we'll discuss about outcomes and lessons learned. Tomal Sohoral will talk about the pilot project made at Air Cargo. So he's the manager cargo solutions, strategy and business development. Then for the fourth part, we will discuss about the handling of interactive cargo, the main challenges and potential solutions. So this presentation will be done by James Hookam, who is the Secretary General of the Global Shippers Forum. And then we will invite you for a networking session to discuss and meet with the interactive cargo project participants. So how to participate during the webinar? So each part is followed by a 5-minute questions and answers. So type your questions and comments in the question panel, and you can also raise your hand. We'll see if we have time to let you discuss, to unmute you. Then we'll invite you to join the Ayada Interactive Cargo virtual space to exchange all together. So now let's start with the part 1 and the project achievements and next steps. So the time to prepare for COVID-19 has been during the whole year, and so our cargo is playing a key role in this part. So this capability is crucial for quick and efficient transport and distribution of COVID-19 vaccine, and it will not happen without careful planning led by government and supported by industry stakeholders. So we play a key role in there. We have also seen in the previous months that air cargo is an essential component of cross-border e-commerce. So airlines must transform to meet the needs of shippers. So high-speed shipping, transparency, reliability, agility, and consistency in the delivery. So our vision at Ayada is to equip airlines and the air cargo supply chain with responsive air cargo services based on intelligent systems to enable to locate, track, monitor, notify, alert when there are deviations, and also response to such deviations to meet customers' expectations, and also to report on the cargo journey to allow data-driven improvements. So this vision has shaped the Interactive Cargo project. So the goal of this project is to provide stakeholders in the air cargo supply chain with a set of standards and guidance documents to enable and ease the use of IoT devices for interaction with cargo. So the project is divided in 5 work packages. The first one is about interactivity characterization. So what are the interactions we expect to have with cargo? So that's why we worked on setting a common vocabulary around IoT device data. So how to describe a device, what are the data we expect to capture from such device and that we want to share in air cargo. So I will present the results of our recommended practice. And now we are working on standard operating procedures to implement the IoT device data model. And once you have access to such data, what use do you make of it? So how to address deviations, what actions can be taken. So this is what we are working on now. The second work package is called device certification. Here we focus on the approval of the use of devices by air carriers. So we developed a recommended practice on the approval of the use of such devices on board aircraft. And now we are looking at standard operating procedures as well on how to ease the adoption and the use of IoT devices. The third work package is about data use agreement. So how to handle the access sharing of such data. And so we developed an amendment to the recommended practice on the conditions of carriage for cargo. And Carlos Tornero will present the work that has been done on this topic. We have created a new work package this year, work to address challenges around interactive cargo handling. So once you have your device approved and you can use your device, assuming you are able to share data, how do you then handle such interactive cargo? So there's a focus on the acceptance of interactive cargo. So what has to be done to be able to use such IoT devices? So we are looking at the problems and identifying solutions around that. So we're discussing about the possibility to create a specific label for interactive cargo. So what could it help improve? So this is an ongoing discussion. And also using an electronic monitoring device spatial handling code. So is it relevant to use such code? And the last aspect is about updating, looking at the specificities of the interactive cargo handling process. And so this topic will be further detailed by James Hookam in the 4th part of this webinar. And so this year we really focus on pilots for operational validation. Our objective is to validate the standards that we have developed. And so for that, we rely on these pilots to validate the recommended practices and also develop the standard operating procedures. So how are we organized? The project started in May 2020 and will finish this year. So we will deliver the standard operating procedures. and we have delivered the policy papers and recommended practices, as well as the data use agreement. In terms of participations, so the Interactive Cargo Task Force is composed of more than 60 participants representing the whole supply chain. So from airlines to ULD manufacturers, freight forwarders, aircraft manufacturers, device manufacturers, IT service providers. So we have members, observers, as well as Ayada subject matter experts and invited experts. So now let's move on to the first work package, interactivity characterization. The question here is how to integrate interactive cargo data into one record. So one record is our standard data model to enable data sharing across the air cargo industry. So what we did is that we looked at the business needs in terms of interactions with cargo, and we defined what we want to capture and what we want to measure. What are the data, temperature, geolocation, things like that. And then so we identified the data elements required, and we agreed with the task force on a common language. So what data do we capture, in which unit, what are the unit of measurement, things like that. And we integrated these data elements into the one record data model. If you want to know more, so you have a dedicated session next week on the one record, so part of our digital cargo conference. So you will be able to find the results in the recommended practice IoT device data sharing in air cargo. So this recommended practice will be available in the next release of the Cargo Services Resolution Manual. Within this recommended practice, so we define a common vocabulary for air cargo to enable cargo interactions using IoT devices. So by using these data elements, it will help you communicate, share data easily. So this is really the objective. You can have access, use the data model on our Ayada Cargo GitHub, where you will find the data model. So in the recommended practice, as you can see on the right side, we define how to describe a device. So its definition, its composition, and its identification. So it's a key point we talked about, and its measurement capabilities. And then we focused on sensors. So what are the sensors we are interested in, and how to identify them, how to describe them. So as I said, this year we want to validate this data model. So we have pilot project objectives to test and refine our data model. So this is one of our objectives. We want to integrate the data model of IoT devices into the one record data model. So does it work? Does it enable to get data on devices about a shipment? Are we able to use the Ayada standard API for IoT devices? So this is what we test on our pilot project. And why using the one record data model and the API? The ultimate goal is to capture real-time data on cargo conditions, and then to share this IoT data across the supply chain, and develop operational procedures to respond to deviation. So this is what we are working on now. So you can see on the left the data model of IoT devices that has been added to the Ayada Cargo GitHub. So you see we use the digital twin of the device with its identification, and so a device can have one or several sensors and can have can take several measures. So we define the type of measures we look at. You will also be able to find a description of these elements. You have a screenshot on the right. So this work is part of our One Record initiative. So here we invite the task force to implement the One Record API, as it enables secured exchange of data. So you have everything on the One Record developer portal to implement the One Record API and the IoT part as well. So you will be guided by clicking on Start Now, and you find resources, video learning, things like that, to help you implement One Record. Now moving to device certification. So here we wanted to set a standard approval process for airlines. So with the task force, we analyzed the as-is situation to understand the constraints, the regulatory framework, so focusing on FAA and EASA requirements. And we looked at the current approval processes of air carriers. And then we identified the main pain points and the priorities. And so the result is our recommended practice that actually mutualize requirements from FAA and EASA and propose a simplified standard approval process. So for the first step, for the as-is analysis, we looked at the regulations and guidance documents. So this list is available in the recommended practice. We wanted to refer to the most up-to-date and relevant materials. So then in this recommended practice, what will you find? You will find the approval process for the use of portable electronic devices on board aircraft. And you will find also a standard approval request form that you can already download on our ayata.org interactive cargo webpage. And so this recommended practice is available as well in the next release of the Cargo Services Resolution Manual. So in it, we have the process, which is a four-step process, and checklists. Here is an overview of the content of the recommended practice. So we identified four main steps. The first one is that it starts with the reception of the request form and supporting documents. So here we define a standard request form you can find in the middle. And the first step will be to check the request validity. And then there are two aspects to look at. The first one is to check the electromagnetic compatibility. So if the entire aircraft fleet is PED tolerant, you can skip this step as an air carrier, and then you will have to check the device battery compliance. And so, and the last step is to issue the letter of approval. So in the request form on the middle, you can see the information we identified that needs to be captured. And in terms of checklist, we explain how to verify that your aircraft is PED tolerant. And if not, how to verify that the device is electromagnetic compatible with your aircraft. So what do we expect from our pilots? So we want to validate that the approval process is efficient, valid. We want to validate the approval request form, that it is useful and clear, understandable, and that we have all the information we need to capture, the minimum information. And so we want to simplify the approval process for interlines. And we're also looking at the possibility to develop a pre-assessment of cargo tracking devices by an independent validator to reduce the workload of air carriers. Then the last point is to create a database of approved cargo devices to help in the identification of approved cargo devices that can be used. So here you see so the process we want to validate. And on this slide, the request form we want to validate. So it's a two Excel file. So you have two sheets on it. The first one is information on the requester and the device. And the second sheet is about the supporting documents to provide. So now I'm going to introduce the work package on data use agreement. So how did we work? So we wanted to understand the risk related to the use of interactive cargo data. So we looked at the data legal framework with regard to tracking devices. We identified mitigation risks. So this is really where the Ayada legal department played a key role. And then we defined amendment to the conditions of carriage, and I will leave the floor to Carlos Tornero to explain to you what we've done on this topic.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. I hope everybody can hear me. Can you hear me? Yep. So that's right. I mean, this is essentially, for those of you who don't know, Ayada develops certain standards for the industry through its Cargo Services Conference. We have a series of resolutions and recommended practices. Probably the most notable is the Ayada Airway Bill and the conditions of contract on the reverse of that document. And we also obviously develop standards for delivering dangerous goods, live animals, and a number of other areas involving cargo. And the digital nature of cargo has certainly played a big role in the Cargo Services Conference activities. And so naturally, with the adoption of IoT devices and the risks and opportunities that they present to our members, there was a need to address this area. You'll know that the term IoT devices is essentially interchangeable with a number of other terms that are used in this area, such as data loggers and cargo tracking devices and portable electronic devices. I don't know if we've landed on one specific term yet for the generic term for these devices, but those are essentially the terms I've come across so far. And as these devices become more of a reality, the legal landscape needs to evolve, and essentially it's presenting a number of issues, both from, as Sonia mentioned, both on the safety front and on the data front. Obviously, first and foremost, safety issues are key. Data privacy and protection issues, general liability issues, who owns the data emanating from these devices, and how do we determine the intellectual property rights over those as well, have been issues that have surfaced and seen as important to the players in this area. Obviously, when we're talking about lithium batteries, that raises everybody's eyebrows and creates concerns. And so we want to make sure that these devices have been approved by independent agencies, civil aviation authorities, or other regulatory bodies have approved the devices that are going on aircraft. And we want shippers, to tell us when these devices are being used and disclose their presence in cargo shipments. And then finally, I guess just generally, these devices will help the quality of the service, right? I mean, ultimately, customers are our first and foremost objective here, that they be content with the service that's being provided, and that these devices do offer the shippers and carriers and not everybody else on the supply chain, forwarders and ground handlers, the ability to pinpoint exactly when issues arise. And that has historically obviously been, one of the sort of, I guess, dark areas in this process in the supply chain and management of being able to pinpoint exactly when damage occurs to the cargo. So clearly something that is one of the main benefits of these devices. So we can go to the next slide. Do I do that? Okay, all right, thanks. So as I mentioned, the Cargo Services Conference does develop certain standards in the form of resolutions and recommended practices. One of our recommended practices, 1601, is the essentially the model agreement for the conditions of carriage for cargo. This recommended practice serves as the basis for many carriers and their own conditions of carriage that you can readily see on their websites. And at the end of the day, it is an agreement between the carrier and the shipper. And we felt that this would be the most efficient way to include the data use agreement between the carrier and the shipper, rather than have a standalone agreement that that could be used. Nothing prevents that from happening. Obviously, this is just a recommended practice. If a carrier or shipper wants something more robust, they're obviously free to do that on a bilateral basis. But this was seen as a way to at least cover what we consider to be the main issues involved with the use of these devices. Number one, first and foremost, we want disclosure of the use of these devices. We want to know the name of the device, the manufacturer, and model of these IoT devices. We want to ensure that it's been approved. It's approved device, either by an independent organization or by the carrier itself. As Sonia mentioned, we're looking at creating a database of approved devices. That's essentially the carrier through Ayada approving devices. And does it contain any lithium battery? Clearly, one of the biggest safety concerns is the use of lithium batteries, and to ensure that they've been handled and packaged properly, and that these devices do, to the extent they do contain a lithium battery, are not going to pose a risk of some sort of fire within the cargo hold, which would obviously be tragic. Secondly, we want to make sure that the carrier, that the shipper warrants that these devices are working properly. Again, related to the safety device and ensuring that that these devices aren't going to improperly interfere with the airline operations. Third, we do want the carrier to have a right to use the data emanating from these devices. Again, going back to the quality issue. And finally, to the extent that these devices do cause any damage or injury to carrier or to third parties, we want the shipper to be responsible for that, which is sort of standard language with regard to any kind of damage or injury to carrier or third parties that the shipper onboards onto an aircraft or tenders to the carrier could create. So that's in a nutshell what we've done. That'll be, as Sonia mentioned, apparent in the next iteration of the Cargo Services Resolutions Manual. And with that, I turn it back over to you, Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So now let's move on to the fourth work package, interactive cargo handling. So here we have started the discussions about the challenges in interactive cargo handling. James Hookam will give you more insights about these challenges from the shipper's perspective. So I listed here some points that he will talk about. So here, what we want to help is to clarify the procedures and requirements for using approved cargo tracking devices and data loggers, and also to clarify the way to declare and describe such devices, and also discuss about how to verify that the device is approved for Interline. So what we want is to avoid inconsistency and inhibit the movement of goods. So this is really what is at stake here. So now I would like to present to you our pilots. So how do we define our pilots? So we we look for participants and we define the scope of the pilots with them. And then we adopt the stage gate process for these pilots. So today we have, for the interactivity characterization work package, 5 pilots ongoing and 2 for the device certification work package. So the first one, I will go rapidly on it, as you will have a detailed presentation by Tom on the topic. The goal is really to enable visibility tracking and alerts at the piece level. So it involves the deployment of installation of devices, definition of flow of data, and the definition also of procedures to handle cargo IQ milestones, and to enable the monitoring of shipment movements. So we have other pilots also looking at real-time tracking for shipments requiring special handling. So for this pilot, so what has been done is the installation of the receivers and the development of the platform to display data from the devices. And now the pilot is looking for shippers and freight forwarders to test the real-time tracking of shipments. So if you are interested in taking part in this pilot, so feel free to contact us at interactivecargo.ayada.org. So we have also another pilot here again on real-time tracking using a web platform compliant with One Record. So here the objective is to have door-to-door visibility of the shipment, so a visibility of tracking data for temperature-sensitive shipments, and the display of real-time information of temperature and geolocation information. So the pilot team is looking for shippers and freight forwarders as well, and has its platform installed. We also have pilot projects with the multi-modal transportation. So here you have the example of an air road transport focusing on IoT aspects and data sharing in multi-modal logistic chain. And so the last pilot we have is about IoT data collection, distribution, and reporting. The Cargo Community User Group UK, as well as Nextshore, developed a One Record server last year. And so they would like to enhance their platform with IoT functionalities. So it starts with real-time alerts to notify parties about cargo movements. They also want to develop a database of en route personnel involved in handling of special cargo. The publication of such data set, also the link with Cargo IQ platforms, and the aggregation also of IoT, so not only having the view at the piece level, but also the movements of goods. So it means aggregating a set of data, anonymizing this data, and to share insights for overall shipping improvement. So they will develop visualization, visuals of route failures, risk areas, using, for example, heat map overlays. So if you want to take part in these pilots, feel free to contact us. So they are looking for shippers, freight forwarders, airlines, ground handlers, and device manufacturers to create really this aggregated view of the movements of shipments. Now about the approval of the use of devices. So we have one pilot, so Singapore Airlines Cargo has implemented the standard approval process that we recommend to use with the request form. So the first results they have is a 66% reduction in approval duration. Time decreased from 93 days to 1 month. So it's a very good result. And so it's mainly thanks to a comprehensive set of documentation received with the request, the standard request form we have. And we are discussing with them how to improve the request form to ease the review of supporting documents. We have also another pilot project on the development of a pre-assessment by an independent validator. We are looking for airlines and device manufacturers that want to take part in this pilot. So we have launched a survey to understand and validate the need of such pre-assessment. So is it useful for airlines to have such pre-assessment, and how will it be used? So we have first results of our survey on how to improve the airline approval process of such devices. And so the main reasons why requests are rejected or when it takes more time is missing information. So such pre-assessment could help actually to make sure that you have a valid request, and it would ease the work of airlines by reducing their workload. So if you want to have more information on the topic, feel free to check our Interactive Cargo webpage. And if you want to get involved in contributing in our pilot project or launching your own pilot project, contact us at interactivecargo.ayata.org. And now, so if you have questions, so I'm going to check the questions we received. So we received one question. So feel free to write your question in the question panel. So what is current Ayada project status on the coordination with radio authority in each country, especially FAA and EASA to use PED for cargo? We haven't covered the coordination with the radio authority. What we have focused on is the list of requirements in terms of at the device levels to be able to be used or to be authorized on board aircraft. This is the focus we have covered with the task force. So I don't see other questions. So what I propose is that we move to the next. There's another question, sorry. So is the signal transmission disabling a factor in IATA's new process for approval of cargo devices? So about signal transmissions, in the request form, so we ask for some information, and depending on the level of transmission, you may have to turn off your device on flight or not. So what we've done is that we covered requirements from both Ayada and FAA on these aspects. So what you can do is look at our request form that is available online on ayata.org interactive cargo. And so, yeah, so this is how we cover the regulations. So we have another question, which is how long does the process of device approval take? So it really depends on the air carrier. Today, a device manufacturer has to request the approval for each air carrier, and so it may vary from several days, 1-2 weeks, up to several months. So we have another question about did you involve aircraft manufacturers in this working group? Yes, thank you for your question. Indeed, we invited during last webinar, so last year, we had a presentation from Airbus on the regulatory aspect and a focus on aircraft that are PED tolerant. And so we worked with aircraft manufacturers. So Boeing and Airbus reviewed the recommended practice to make sure that this is relevant and valid. So how feasible is this Ayata interactive cargo devices, and how long is this process? So for the approval process, we already had the questions. What are the benefits of digital cargo to ground handlers? So here, what we expect, I will let maybe James Hookam talk about the benefits for the supply chain about the handling of such interactive cargo. We have the discussions with ground handlers about these aspects. So how will it impact the ground handling operations? There's another questions about can Ayata provide an initial qualification letter to cargo device manufacturers for airline approvals? This is what we are exploring now with this survey, is could an independent validator, Ayata go through the request form and the supporting documents and provide such pre-assessment specifying that it is in line with Ayata's recommendations. So we want to see if it's an opportunity to really reduce the workload for air carriers, and how are they going to use such approval. So I see that there are other questions, so we are going to move on to the next topics. If you want to discuss with us, we have actually created a networking space. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. So you can join the Ayata Interactive Cargo virtual workspace. So you have areas per topics. So you can, for example, meet Carlos Tornero on the data use agreement area. At the end of the webinar, I will be in the pilots and hackathon area if you want to continue to discuss about the pilots. So you can enter this virtual space to have a face-to-face discussion with us. So now I'm going to leave the floor to Jeff Clark, so founder and CEO of 7P Solutions, so who will talk about safely and efficiently approving the use of cargo tracking devices. So Jeff, over to you.
Hi, Sonia. Thank you very much. And Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are. As Sonia mentioned, we were part of the program or pilot for safely and effectively approving PED devices, portable electronic devices on aircraft. The pilot was exploring ways to simplify, expedite, and standardize the approval process across air carriers as well as civil air authorities while remaining safe. You can go ahead and change the slide there. Thank you. The goals that we had really for this project is Sonia mentioned earlier, was to adopt an Ayada recommended practice for the approval process that again would simplify this across all carriers so that the PED manufacturers could all work from the same hymn sheet, if you will, having a standardization that would allow them to expedite the approval process. Throughout this, we established a standardized checklist that would be utilized with supporting documents. Supporting documents within that also then standardized the information that was required. Device manufacturer, model numbers, lithium battery details, and associated testing that EASA and the FAA and other civil authorities may require. Throughout this process, one of the big goals was also to decrease the duration required for air carriers to accomplish the approval process. Just experience shows us, and through the process that I believe Sonia mentioned earlier, this can take, depending on the carrier, anywhere from a couple of days to several months. And then as I got this on the next slide, there's other challenges or things that we had to overcome and wanted to find ways to approve as well. The challenges, as I mentioned, again, our experience was that across the industry, from a regulatory standpoint as well as from an air carrier approval standpoint, there were differences. And again, the pilot was to help standardize these differences. The documents required, we did this through, again, the standardization of the request form with supporting documents. We found that not every provider provided the correct documents, but the airlines in some instances may not have necessarily known what documents were important. Again, I spoke about the time and the difference in the time frame. I think two of the more important parts of this approval process was how can providers, device manufacturers, expedite the approval process of different models. So device manufacturers may have different models, for instance, that have the same technology, but the devices are inherently different. They may be disposable versus reusable, those types of things. And then next generation, as with our cell phones, devices have gone from 2 to 3 to 4G devices. That technology changes rapidly. So how do we standardize that process of a device that's been approved, and essentially the only thing that has changed may be the networks to which it communicates. And then thirdly, interline and code sharing. Those are things that we have to think about as well in the approval process and how they work. Next slide, please. The approval process thus far in the pilot. The experience that we saw was certainly an improvement in quite a few different areas. I think certainly through this pilot, all parties were aligned much better than maybe past experiences shows us. And this was not only between the technology provider, but also and the airline, but also with the civil air authorities. We have found that not in every airline their home-based country requires that the civil air authority directly be involved, but certainly there are countries where that is required. And our pilot project took place in a country where certainly the civil air authorities had a major role in the approval process of the device. We found that by having the request form with supporting documents helped drastically, I think, to improve this process. It eliminated a lot of back and forth questions. Everything was presented in an orderly fashion, which I think helped reduce the number of questions that we saw. Sonia gave the numbers on the duration that it took to do this process. It literally took it from months to maybe just a couple of weeks, if not days, when you really look at the time that folks from the airline, the provider, and the civil air authority spent on the project. So it was a drastic improvement. And within this, there were also 2 different device models. Both have the same technology, but they were different models that were approved. So I think in this first pilot program, for the approval process, it was well received, and I think that our objectives were met in showing that standardization and information can certainly improve the process. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Sonia, and I appreciate everybody's time and listening.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Do you have questions? If yes, feel free to write them in the question panel. And so if you want to continue the discussion with Jeff, so he will be in the virtual space in the IoT device approval area. So if you have if you want to know more about this pilot and questions around this topic. So we have one question, which is how critical is the endorsement of the device OEM to the assessment of the airline?
What was that question, Sonia?
How critical is the endorsement of the device OEM to the assessment of the airline?
How critical is the assessment of the device from the manufacturer to the airline?
Could you specify the question or raise your hand? Because so that we can also raise your hand if you want to be unmuted.
While you're waiting, I think from what I understand of that, it's important for the OEM or the supplier of the device to, first and foremost, they have to understand the technology of the device, and they have to have the proper testing documents in place. The RTCA testing, the battery testing, to name a couple of things. So an OEM must certainly understand the product that they would want to be utilizing on any particular airline. And I think the request form will help with that process, because it asks for those those bits and pieces of information that you need.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. So if there are no other questions, so thank you very much, Jeff. We'll move on to our next speaker. Thomas Horab, Manager Cargo Solutions Strategy and Business Development at Air Canada Cargo, about sharing IoT device data with One Record. So Thomas, over to you.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you, Sonia. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. My name is Tom Sorab. I'm the Manager of Cargo Solutions and Business Strategy and Development at Air Canada Cargo. I'm extremely excited to present the content of this presentation. This is one of the first times I'll be presenting some of these images outside of the walls of Air Canada. So I've been given permission to share the information and knowledge and some of the lessons learned from the IoT pilot projects that we have. Next slide, please. So with all presentations or business cases, I'd like to break it off into 3 sections. It's just a simple way to present and a simple way for my audience to digest the information. The first part, really, I start discussing some of the historical moments that have happened in cargo at Air Canada and also in technology, and how they kind of overlap and how they depend on each other or how they've been influenced by each other. Part 2, I ask you the question, should an airline focus on the IoT devices themselves, how they work, what they do, how they can be used, or should the airline be focusing on an infrastructure of receiving these devices, approving these devices, utilizing these devices, and allowing customers to use these devices? So it's a question of the car or the road. What do you work on and what do you focus on? And then in part 3, it's more of the lessons learned and some of the unintended outcomes of our IoT projects. So cargo and beyond, what happens, what has this transparency brought us, and what is it creating for us for future opportunities? Next slide, please. This is probably one of my favorite images from the Air Canada onboarding new employee package. It's literally 7 pictures outlining 80 years of the company's history. I found this to be very succinct and very detailed in exactly what it shows. I'll go into it in the next slide. Next slide, please. As I'm sure many of you are going to enjoy this part, this is a history of aviation select excerpts by Tom Sorab, specifically for the content of this presentation. So obviously, most of us know that aviation began in the early 1900s with the Wright brothers and Santos Dumont, and that was the first flights and the first time a device took off the ground and had flight. 1937 is a very specific year for Air Canada. Air Canada was primarily a mover of mail. They moved bags and bags of mail. And someone had this really great idea of getting people to sit on top of the bags of mail and charge them to sit on the mail. That became the first passenger on Air Canada. It was known as TCA, Trans-Canada Airlines, but that was the first passenger. And that obviously continued on and actually became a bigger part of the business. And then by the 1950s, we had the introduction of jet engines. In 1958, Air Canada introduced almost a black box. They introduced a multi-channel recording system, which later on became the black box. So this is one of Air Canada's many firsts. They created the first black box. 1995 is a significant year, not just for aviation, but more for technology. There's a coalescence of internet being readily available to the general public, and also the increase of computer processing with the Intel chip. Those 2 things combined with what was happening in aviation really led to some of the advancements that I'm going to be discussing later on. And obviously, I think we know that a few years later we had some increased security measures, and we also had a lot of the acquisition of a lot of other airlines to become a larger airline. By 2007, Air Canada created the first electronic boarding pass, and also started creating their first mobile apps. So we had the Air Canada Cargo app available in 2007, e-booking platform by 2009, I believe. And by 2014, we were offering Wi-Fi in flight. So in conclusion, this whole slide, what I want to focus on is two things, two birth dates. The first birthday is the commercial aviation industry that came from cargo mail. And the second conclusion is really the birth of the digital revolution, which increased the new standard of communication, or what I call the global globalization, and that became the new standard of communication for many of us. Next slide, please. So in this slide, what I wanted to really discuss is the common denominators, or what's really how we want to use data, because the data is what's really important about what we want to do with cargo. The passenger business is very complex and is not as simple as one would seem. There is an ordering process that happens through our travel management companies, the TMCs. They'll order through their booking engine, which will go into Prism, which is a program that captures all the variables of what happened. So it captures variables like the class type of the seat, which fare bucket it went to, the frequency of the flight, the capacity of the aircraft, so on and so forth. So all these variables are captured in this booking. And it's stored into a database that we filter, and then the airlines subscribe to it so they can understand their market share. But it's not really the word market share, it's their performance. How well is the airline doing in comparison to their competitors with the variables that the airline is able to offer? So this is a good performance indicator. In cargo, we don't have that, and that's something that we are working with On Record, with One Record, and with all these IoT devices. We have Cargo IQ, we have some of the milestones that are listed there. Those can be some of the common denominators that we want to use. We have to kind of just start developing these variables of which variables we want to have as common denominators at the freight forwarder level. Unfortunately, cargo is drenched in paperwork. I mean, it's completely, you fill paperwork out in the quintuplets and sextuplets just to get an import and export of cargo. Even if it's a domestic shipment, there's several pieces of paper that are filled out and filed. It doesn't become digital, or even if it does become digital, it's still a complex digital document that you'd have to physically go over to actually extract the information. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that the passenger business of the aviation industry is far ahead of us when it comes to technology, even though it was born from cargo. And the cargo part of the industry, as one of my directors said, is significantly behind our brothers and sisters above the wing. So in conclusion, the common denominator needs to be established so that we can evaluate performance and quality for our cargo and hybrid carriers. Next slide, please. So this is a little cute slide going into part 2. So really I'm asking you, should an airline focus on what and how IoT devices work and what they can be used for, or should the airline focus on preparing for an infrastructure to support the data and expedite the carriage of these devices? So really focus on the cars or focus on the roads. That's what we want to understand. Next slide, please. The answer is roads. And the reason why I also say the answer is roads is because if you have a short-sighted vision of IoT technology, you will focus on the cars. You'll focus on what this fancy new toy will do. You'll focus on how to use it. You'll focus on what to double click. And when you do that, you will be distracted from the long-term vision. If you have long-term vision in IoT, in aviation and beyond, you'll understand that you need to develop an infrastructure to allow these devices to be absorbed by the organization, by the business processes, by the stakeholders that are going to be involved in the handling process, and also understand how you want to mine the data for performance indicators. So that's the key takeaway that you can have if you focus on the infrastructure. In this slide, I show a picture of the Toronto warehouse. I show a picture of our ULDs from Uniload, and I show a picture of an aircraft. And in our warehouse, we have IoT devices that capture what happens in the building. Temperatures, it has alarms if something happens, it notifies people, and it also lets us know when things go in and out of the building. The ULDs are what holds the cargo, and we can track the conditions of the ULD when it's within our custody and when it's within our areas. And the aircraft is something that we are currently working on, and I'll be talking about that in the next few slides. The main conclusion of this slide is one line: if you don't care about quality, you don't care about your customer. The motivation behind the enhancements or the development of these IoT devices is really another Ayada program, which is Ayada CEIV Live Animal and Ayada CEIV Pharmaceuticals. I was fortunate enough to become the project manager for the live animals, and I'm very happy to say that getting that certification was another one of the Air Canada firsts. In a few slides, I'll talk about another Air Canada first. Next slide, please. So in this slide is an overhead map of an aircraft and the Toronto facility. We scaled out the areas of how and what we want to do. So our teams didn't arbitrarily choose where and how we would use these devices or what we wanted to collect. We ran several experiments on grounded aircraft, in facilities, in flight, and also we ran a lot of tests with obstructions, so steel, metal, and other obstructions. In short, we had some poor results from certain manufacturers, and we had some phenomenal results from other manufacturers. And these tests became the foundation of all the work that followed since the tests that we ran in 2018. Next slide, please. This is an overhead view of Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. I have Toronto entirely mapped. I can tell you what temperature any part of the building is at any time using my phone or using a dashboard. So can any of the Toronto managers in Toronto that handle cargo. We have this in place so that we don't put cargo at risk, and that helps us with our CEIV certification for quality. Later tonight, I'll be installing the Montreal facility, and later next month, I'll be installing the Vancouver facility. These facilities weren't completed because of COVID, so the actual initial install date was April 1st of 2020, which unfortunately didn't happen, but it will be happening later this month. So in other words, we can digitally track using Bluetooth all the entire facilities without any hesitation. We get approximately 128 readings per day at each of the facilities for each sensor that we have. Next slide, please. This is my favorite slide. This is a picture book or a photo album of 3.5 years of my work. I was extremely fortunate to have several directors at Air Canada follow me on this journey. Not only did they follow me, but they actually led certain initiatives, getting the devices approved, getting STCs for the aircraft, getting production permits, working with the Transport Canada to get these devices installed into an aircraft. As you heard in the previous presentations, it's quite complicated and a bit difficult to get devices approved to be on an aircraft. You can only imagine how difficult and how bureaucratic is not the right word, so I want to be very careful what I say, how safety focused and educational the process is to install a device onto the aircraft. That means the aircraft is always being tracked and monitored. If the airplane is turned off, it's still tracking the temperatures and sending alarms and letting you know what's going in and out of the aircraft. It's pretty much a digital security guard of what's happening on the plane. So yes, we did install sensors on Tail 282, and that's the registration number of the aircraft. So if you want to go look at it at FlightAware or any of these other applications, you can see its network, and I pretty much have all the reports of everything that's happened in flight. The bottom left-hand corner was something very unique to us. Aircrafts in Canada in the month of February and January and December, they have a tendency to freeze. If they freeze, the AOG, the water lines in the back will burst, and then the aircraft is grounded, which has lost revenue and lost other opportunities at Air Canada. So with these IoT devices installed right at the water tanks, behind the panels, we will have a predictive indicator on if this aircraft will have its water lines burst. And if it does, and comes close to these indications that it will burst if it continues in this trend, we have the ability to deploy a maintenance team to go out there and rescue the aircraft before it freezes over and before it becomes a cost instead of a revenue opportunity. So yeah, these sensors are always transmitting all the time, and they are installed into the aircraft. I will be able to answer questions on this later because I'm quite certain that there's going to be a lot of questions on this. Next slide, please, Sonia. For this slide, I'm not going to focus too much on what Uniload is doing, but I will let you know that Uniload has the same IoT devices installed in their ULDs, whether it be an AKE or an AAP or a PMC. They have the ability to track and talk to our structure and our network, and we can talk to their structure and their network. So we do have data sharing models with our vendor, who is actually not our IoT vendor, but also one of the other vendors for a different application. So this has been a really great overlap that we've been able to utilize. We've had a data sharing model built in place, and we have access to certain platforms so that we can collect information on ULDs that are in our possession. Next slide, please. One of the unintended outcomes of this project was tracking assets. We wanted to track a cargo that was going in and out of the building, but how about cargo that's always moving in the building and is never supposed to leave the building? So we have our pump trucks, our electric and our manual pump trucks, that unfortunately get removed from the premises by our customers. Unintentionally, it gets onto a truck and it drives away from the warehouse, and then when we lose that asset, we have to purchase a new one to replace it. So I was asked to use my sensors to see if, or the on-asset sensors, to see if we could track our assets to prevent them from actually leaving the premises. And if they left the premises, they would send off email alarms and send up other alarms and text messages, SMS messages, so that the operational staff can quickly review the footage and find out which loading dock it left from, and contact that driver to have them come back and return our asset to us. Since its installation in 2019, we have not lost a single asset. We used to lose about approximately 10 to 15 a year, to my understanding. Next slide, please. So with that unintended opportunity, we started looking at other opportunities. What else can we track? What else can we monitor? Because we're looking at trying to share data with One Record and with our vendors and having a common denominator. But then we thought, what else can we track, and how can we get some more motivation from our customers, and not only cargo customers, but maybe our passengers as well, because we know that that's a catalyst for a lot of growth and development. So we have the ability to build onto obviously our cargo one-piece tracking or multi-piece tracking. We want to have the facilities mapped for heat zones or heat maps. We want to track dumb assets, and dumb assets are things like tow bars and dollies and even wheelchairs in the airports. These are dumb assets. It's a piece of metal that you need to find to do a job. There's ground service equipment that requires daily sign-off inspections to be used, so we can track those assets as well. And then on the right-hand column, this is some of the commercial opportunities that we can have with our passengers, and how we can share data with them in a safe and encouraging way, so that they would want to be part of that communication model. So passenger tracking of bags, tracking of unaccompanied minors, so that the parents can know exactly where the minors are. They know which employee they're with, and they know what their steps are towards getting to the next parent. Pet location tags, as you know, airlines do have the ability to, I don't want to say misplaced, but sometimes a pet can be not in the right location, and the pet location tag will allow the customers and also the airlines to know that these pets are in the right location and they should be in the right location. And obviously, a form of gratitude and thank you to our customers by giving them a digital bag tag for their carry-on luggage. So the altitude bags, because we give out these status markers to our top customers. And why not give them an IoT status marker instead of a regular piece of plastic? This IoT marker would connect to the Air Canada commercial app, so that they could track their cargo, which is their personal belongings, using the Air Canada app, the same way an employee can track the Air Canada assets using the Air Canada app as well. Next slide, please. And as you can see from the on-asset suite of devices, in 2018, Adam Crossnow, Paul Rodwell of On-Asset, and I, we worked on I'll just call it an Air Canada tag to be unique to Air Canada's needs. We created this in 2018, and as you know from what happened in 2021, Apple released their Apple tag. To my surprise, the Air Canada tag actually has more functionalities and more connectivity than the Apple AirTag. It doesn't have sound for compliance reasons, but it has all these other functions and opportunities that the Apple tag doesn't. So I'm looking forward to eventually releasing the Air Canada tag to our customers and to our assets and to our employees when that future comes. And of course, this all depends on building the roads, building the infrastructure, and building a data model that works for every partner and maintaining privacy along every stage of the way. So putting this all together, we will be able to have everyone connected and have transparency be king of quality and service to all of our customers. Next and final slide, please. I want to thank you all for your time, and Sonia, I would like to hand it back to you, and thank you again for allowing me to present my vision, Blue Skies.
Thank you very much, Tom. So if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat. So I don't see questions right now. And also you will be able to discuss with Tom in the IoT data sharing area. So as you can see, there are some people that are already in the room. And so you can navigate in the space and talk with people to know more about the project. So if you want to ask a question, you can write it down or raise your hand and I will unmute you. So we have one question, which is per air carrier presentation, not only airlines, but also freight forwarders are deploying similar tracking devices into their consolidation shipments. Does air carrier also see similar movement from forwarders? We don't hear you, Thomas.
I apologize, I double-clicked the wrong thing. Yes, we do see more and more forwarders inquiring about tracking devices and how to use them and what's permitted. And this is especially because the forwarders are doing more than just the airport to airport. They're doing the road feeder services, the warehouse distribution services. So they need to track a bit more than what the airline can provide. And it's beyond the scope and vision of the airline. And that's a privacy issue. So it's great to have a forwarder put tracking devices on their cargo. However, what my objective is to have transparency at the airport to airport for not only the freight forwarder, but also for the shipper as well, because the shippers and consignees are extremely focused on the aviation element because they have full confidence in the other ones because the freight forwarder is handling that, has complete control over those other elements, whether it be road feeder services or ocean or rail.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. We have another question, which is, will other BLE devices be allowed on the air carrier BLE network?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. The air carrier and something?
Will other BLE devices be allowed on the air carrier BLE network?
Absolutely. So right now we only track one or two vendors with the Bluetooth light BLE platform. However, we want to build the infrastructure to be able to absorb and understand as many devices as possible. So have Bluetooth sniffers that can track the Bluetooth devices that are there and then translate them if the OEM gives us that the decrypt message to allow us to decrypt the code, and then we can have that transparent to the customer so that they would be able to see their handling of their cargo when they're not there.
Okay, thank you. Another question. So what regulatory challenges did you face installing tags onto live aircraft? And are you able to comment on how you solved them?
I'm not able to comment on how I solved them because that's right now it's an industry secret. It's not that much of a secret, but it is still a secret that I can't go into a presentation. As into the obstacles, as I said, it took 3.5 years to install into an aircraft when the vision was there, when I drew the first mind map of how these devices would work. I ran into local problems, I ran into international problems, I ran into technical and safety problems, and obviously the Ayada task force for the IoT connected devices is also a good indication of how important this has become, because it's not just a regional problem, it is a global problem, but it's going to be a better solution for all the parties involved as we go through it. I know I didn't answer your question, but yes, I can tell you that there was a lot of obstacles, and it took a lot of brain power from engineers much more intelligent than I to resolve it.
Okay, thank you. And one last question: what type of data is stored in the devices?
The devices are two versions. One device which will just emit a code on a regular basis, and if there's no device to pick it up, then it won't record any information. And then the other one, which is more battery intrusive or more drains more battery, is recording the information until it has a chance to dump the information onto a gateway. So there's a recording type, and then there's just an emitting type. So it depends on which device is used and how that device is recorded. And it's encrypted with the device, so you only understand what that beacon means if you have the decryption codes of that beacon.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tom. So I see that there are more people joining the networking space. So as you can see over here, so feel free to discuss around. And now we're going to move to the next last presentation about the handling of interactive cargo, main challenges and potential solutions. James Hookam is the Secretary General of Global Shippers Forum. So James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and hello to everybody. Pleasure to be with you this webinar and to present to you a perspective on the topics we've been talking about from the point of view of the owner of the cargo that's being moved. The Global Shippers Forum is the voice of cargo owners in international trade. I have been representing that perspective on the Interactive Task Force now for just about a year, and may at this stage say that if there are any shippers watching this that wish to share the load, they'll be very welcome, because it's a very important part of the process. And whilst I can speak with some experience and some authority on this, it's really important that we get some practical shippers involved that are actually looking to want to move these loads on a regular basis. So if I could have the first slide, Sonia, please. I just want to talk about some of the opportunities that shipper members of GSF have been telling me that they foresee in the use of these devices, mainly by way of just giving some confirmatory assurance that this is something that is of great interest and potential use and value to shippers. There are some challenges. You've been hearing a lot about those already in the course of the presentation. Without putting a downer on the whole thing, inevitably, someone who's looking to get their shipment moved and delivered on time is bound to examine this from the point of view, well, what could go wrong? And I just want to set out some of those issues at that stage of the presentation, and then to reassure those that may have doubts that a lot of the issues that we might have foreseen have been identified, and that under the cargo handling work stream, which Sonia described a little earlier, which is part of the overall project, a lot of these are being tackled, a lot of them have been dealt with the overall objective of de-risking the use of smart trackers and data loggers in routine operational shipments. So if we can have the next slide, Sonia, please. There's a lot of interest in this that is being generated by the need for greater transparency, more granular data on the location and the movement and the conditions that shipments are encountering. So quite apart from the wish to make use of the capabilities of the new generation of IoT devices, they do also provide practical responses and answers to some commonly encountered needs by shippers. Obviously, knowing where your shipment is at any one time and being able to check on that almost in real time from the convenience of your mobile phone is a fantastic and realistic scenario, which can be foreseen, and being able to give that kind of visibility to your customers, so your consignees, is also a highly valued outcome from this process. Some of the devices, as we've heard, may even be capable and may even be approved to be able to transmit in flight. That's obviously subject to the approval process that you've heard described already. But again, that adds a whole new dimension to what is very often the longest part of the shipment, and again gives reassurance and visibility to shippers and possibly to consignees. I think the new dimension that the smart devices actually offer is not just to tell you where they are, where the shipment is, but to record some of the other environmental conditions that the shipment is encountering. And this is vital for quality assurance as part of an overall shipment. Shippers would be looking to use these records in order to provide confidence to customers that certain thresholds have not been exceeded, and indeed to be able to deliver goods as per specification. And as we've started to see, some of the capabilities of these systems are to actually be proactively notifying or alerting you to certain conditions having been exceeded. So the possibility of alerts being transmitted because of tampering, a change of route, temperature exceedances, or mechanical shock will certainly add a new dimension to the understanding of shippers as to what their cargoes are encountering in the journey. And then there's the routine notification, not just because something's gone wrong, but simply because you're being told that certain milestones have been reached because of these devices interacting with way stations along the route. So a brave new world that these devices are offering, and therefore a lot of potential interest and added value being given to the users of air cargo. But as we know in the next slide, please, this is new technology. It's as yet unproven in long-term operational practice. So inevitably, there is a need to test some of these assumptions and these scenarios, and just understand what some of the processes might be in actually using them. And let's not forget, these devices are most likely to be used, at least initially, in the sorts of shipments that simply do have to get there on time. So one of the challenges in introducing these devices is being able to give the confidence and the assurance to shippers and cargo owners that by using these devices, they're not suddenly going to open up a whole new raft of challenges and problems and possible delays for the most urgent of their shipments, the one that they simply cannot afford to have disrupted or delayed. So the sort of questions shippers will ask is, how do I work out whether my particular device that I'm looking to use has been approved by the booked airline, or indeed its partner airlines through which it might be interlined and transferred in the course of a journey, possibly at very short notice and possibly even without the knowledge of the shipper. We saw in Carlos's presentation that the data use agreement envisages shippers giving this assurance to carriers that the devices that they're using have actually approved. So that's a two-way process, and we need to try to make that simple for shippers to understand and verify that the devices they want to use will actually be accepted by the airlines they want them to travel on. And is that simply done by providing a short descriptor of the device that's being used, or is there some need to prove evidence of conformity at some stage in the process? And is that at the start of a particular type of shipment, or is it something that's going to be required on an operational basis at every time? Now, I think most shippers are aware of the concerns and the genuine issues around the movement of lithium batteries in devices, and many of the IoT devices we're talking about here, these cargo trackers and data loggers, are likely to be powered by lithium batteries of one type or another, and therefore the application of the dangerous goods regulations is a key issue. And although there may be ways of simplifying the processes by which these items are declared, it's essential that, that those processes are clearly understood, but do not become so entangling that they actually destroy the value and the advantages of using these devices in the first place. There are questions as to whether or not the additional labeling or marking might be required on packages to identify them to handlers and to the airline, and if so, what are those marks and labels, and how should they be applied? How should these shipments that contain these devices be documented? Are there additional entries required in the airway bill? If so, is there a standardized way in which that can be done? Will airlines require advanced notification of the use of these devices? And of course, is there additional costs, and what additional risks of delay might there be because these devices are used? A lot of concern does arise over access to data and the rights to use that data, and I think there are probably some discussions to come about those access rights and the ways that the data user agreement defaults to the open-ended access by the airlines. But these are all issues that we need to discuss. So we go to the next slide. The good news is that nearly all of these issues are on the table under active discussion and development within the Interactive Cargo Project Group. And the cargo handling work stream was added to the group specifically to address these issues and to try to think them through and remove as many of these issues and answer as many of the questions as possible and deliver it as part of the overall implementation procedures and documentation that will accompany the introduction and use of these devices on a routine basis. So there are, as you've heard, methods for recording which devices have been approved and providing an easy means of shippers to check on conformance. There is, under active discussion, standardized handling procedures that could be produced into IATA manuals so that there is a common approach towards assessing and checking and accepting these shipments across all airlines, so that shippers aren't playing a lottery as to whether some airlines will treat them differently to others. We're looking hard at the dangerous goods procedures. It's obviously the regulations are what the regulations are, but whether or not certain assurances can be given over the way that these devices are manufactured that might simplify some of those requirements is something that's also being looked at. Interesting to note as well that there's been a development of devices and trackers which are powered by non-lithium batteries, and that's specifically to try to address this particular issue. I'm confident that there will be common documentation requirements that will be agreed amongst the airlines, and that will again be essential to remove any doubts and variation in the way that airlines address this. And ideally, for shippers, it would be great to have a one-stop source for all the interactive requirements, either on one record or one central repository. Certainly in the early days of the use of these devices, it will be important to make the data available as easily as possible and to demystify, to de-risk the process of their use. This may require cargo acceptance staff and handling staff to have particular training to be able to recognize and understand what needs to happen in the use of these shipments, but that could be part of the overall package of advice to airlines overall. We need to continue to work on the data protection and the security assurances, as I've mentioned, and ultimately I think shippers would like to see the integration of the capabilities that are offered by these devices into something like the Cargo IQ Master Operating Plan, which is certainly the best representation I've seen of describing the end-to-end journey, and perhaps introducing into that some of the advantages and the visibility that these IoT devices can now offer. One particular shipper summed up some of these challenges to me by the phrase that interactive cargo needs to become routine in order to become popular. In other words, we need to do it a few times, get used to it, iron out all the snags for it to really become a viable and popular way of moving cargo. And that's the challenge which Tom was describing just now. Are we dealing with the cargo first, or the road, or the car or the road? And we'll I think that the Interactive Cargo project is providing the best means possible to try to debug these issues at the beginning, and therefore introduce a relatively risk-free route to the use of these devices. So finally, as you've seen in the next slide, just if I can, Sonia, thank you. You've seen this slide already. This is the overall project map. There's interactive cargo handling, the second from the right there, where all these issues are being addressed. So I would like to assure any shippers, or indeed forwarders, that are on the call that the routine use of these devices is being actively addressed, as well as all the one-off characterization and certification issues. The project is certainly looking at making the use of these devices as risk-free and trouble-free as possible. So if there are any other shippers out there want to get joined in, this is your opportunity, and I can promise you a very well managed, very well thought through project that will provide the ideal process for you to find out about the use of these devices and bring your experience and your needs to the table. So thank you for your attention. I'll hand you back to Sonia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. If you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat panel or raise your hand. And right after, now we'll invite you to move to the virtual space to discuss further about the project and meet the project participants as well as the webinar participants. So waiting for questions, I can show you. So I put the link in the chat box. When you click, you should be able to access the space. So you see I'm here, and you can navigate, and we see that people are talking. So you can move by holding your mouse, and then you can meet people, discuss. So Jeff's here. I see Thomas talking here, and James will join as well. So we have one question. So what stands for IoT? So what stands IoT for? So IoT is for Internet of Things. So within this word, we put all connected devices and devices that data loggers as well, that capture data. And so this data then can be shared across a network. Can we have the presentation slides? So yes, you will have the slides available on our website, as well as the video recording. Okay, so I'm waiting for questions. So just to show you so that we have our networking space with people that are connected. And so you can see also people from the Ayada Digital Cargo team. So Davito, Manager Digital Cargo, Arnaud Lambert, One Record Engagement Manager, Christophe Lambert, Project Manager Digital Cargo, and Henk Mulder, Head of Digital Cargo. So this is really the Ayada team working on the digital transformation of the air cargo industry. So feel free to contact us. And this is the end of the third episode on interactive cargo. There are 4 more webinars. The next one is on pilots and hackathon. So we highly encourage you to attend to this event where you will know more about the implementation of One Record. And for the hackathon, we'll have a special track for cargo tracking devices. So if you want to propose a topic, so you can know more on Thursday. Okay, so with that, so I'm going to share one last time the link to our Ayada Interactive Cargo virtual space. Thank you all for your attention, and let's continue the discussion on wonder.me. So thank you all, and feel free to contact us at interactivecargo.ayada or check out our website for the latest news. Thank you. Bye.